Hey folks, how's it going? This is Bill again with the Hang of Rats. We are assembling the O360 A4K. Today we're going to put the crankshaft and the crankcases together, get the center core all put together. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of change format a little bit. Instead of just sitting here and talking and working and tripping over myself, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to try a new format for you folks, and let me know if you like it. What I'm going to do is do a voiceover on all of the work while I'm doing it, and then I can fast forward on some of the stuff. We'll do some close-up pictures and all, and blah 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 blah. So if you like it, let me know. Put something down in the comments. If you don't, well, put something down in the comments too. So that's kind of my deal. I was looking at a couple other YouTubers, and it works out pretty well. So that's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to do that. So that's my plan. Hang on, let's go for a ride. Okay, so we're starting to get things going, getting the crankcase out of the plastic bags. I'm actually starting to get everything ready to take out of the plastic bags. The crankshaft is quite a heavy item, so I don't want to take that out until I'm ready. Again, I'm kind of fumbling with this crankshaft stand. It's a great stand, but I think what I'm going to do is probably actually augment it a little bit with some head-on base, so it's a little more stable for a heavy crankshaft like what we've got. That way it's good for handling, good for assembling, as well as measuring. So that's the deal there. And then just trying to get things organized in in our little studio here, makeshift studio. But it's it's about 100 degrees Fahrenheit out. That's 30 something C. So what we're doing is we've got the 2-4 crankcases in the bag. The 1-3, which is the right or starboard crankcase half, is in our working stand. We're buttering up the bores for the lifter bodies, so we've got our mix. And again, there's a lot of these different the lubricants, some of the procedures as far as safety wiring or safetying or sealants and whatnot are going to be in special inspections and whatnot. So we're using a mix of STP and oil per the Lycoming directions. And we're buttering all these up so everything slides in nice and neat. More oil is better, actually, on build-up like this. As soon as the engine originally starts making oil pressure on first run, it'll be displacing all of this, but most importantly is for that 15, 20, 30 seconds or whatever that we're waiting for oil pressure to come up, we're not going to have any real wear of any note. So we're putting all the lifter bodies, where the hydraulic units and the cups and all that will go in later. That'll be in a later episode when we start installing the cylinders and the valve train items and all that. So we're doing that. I'm also trying not to get slobber oil all over the place. I'm putting it in the cam bores now for that half, getting that all in there, making sure everything is wetted. And most importantly is anytime you put something in, is make sure it spins. And we're just gonna make sure everything's lubricated, wet, more, and this thing will be a drizzling bunch of oil by the time we finish it. On the flip side, I'm also trying not to, there we go, make sure everything spins nice and easy, everything's looking good. So that's where we are there. But the other thing is we're making sure that we get as little wear as possible on that first startup. So on this, on the cam here, we had the cam ground, and we are putting the lubricant that the repair station recommends. Actually comes with the ground camshaft. So that's all going on per their recommendations. They did the machine work, so that's the way that's going on. This is a real thick, it looks like it's a graphite type stuff, but it's real thick. And then we'll also be putting it on the cam, the tappet faces too. In fact, I think I'm just trying to get it all uniform here, making sure I get every lobe. Real important on these engines. So you can see how thick that stuff is. It's kind of slimy and lots of graphite. Now, took that out. The reason I took the cam back out is we're putting this on the actual faces of all of the lifter bodies. So what you see on the tappets, or pardon me, not on the lobes, the cam lobes, we're putting it on the same stuff on the lifter body faces. So that's what's going on there. Again, lots of lubricant stuff all over the place. Next thing we're going to be doing is putting our main bearings in. The mains are oriented kind of interesting. The split line for the forward bearing, the main forward bearing, is actually horizontal to the airplane or 90 degrees to the engine split line itself. So it's kind of a little bit, you got to spend a little time on that. And what we're doing here is we're marking where, give us a visual sight line of how that's going to be when it's on the crankshaft. So what we're going to do on that particular bearing is we're going to butter it to the crankshaft. When we lay the crankshaft in place, then we'll get it clocked in the proper manner. So that's what we're doing there. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of cleaning up making sure that the area where the bearings are going to go in is absolutely still clean. Next topic is we're going to be lubricating the bearings inside and out, and that's, doesn't matter what your style is. This is what Lycoming says to do, so we're going to do what Lycoming says to do. This is a full FA overhaul, so we're doing it per all the manuals. So real important. These are some pretty beefy ones. The mid and aft bearings are the same bearings. The forward bearing, as you saw a little bit earlier, is a big long one. But the mid and afts are the exact same bearing. And we're just making sure everything is got oil wetted on it and all that. Now all that oil is going to basically squeeze out, and it's basically going to be displaced, but it'll also keep any corrosion from happening. And we're just tapping it in with a plastic mallet. Nothing more than that, nothing harder than the engine itself. So we're just making sure it's where it needs to be. There's little tangs on the end of it. Got to make sure those are seated, and then we're also eyeballing the oil lubrication holes and the dowel pin holes. Make sure everything is cool on that. So, and then making sure that there's no junk, so to speak, on the inner bores of the bearing. So same thing, lube them up, lube them up, lube them up. Okay, now what we're doing is we're uncovering, we know that we're going to have to prepare the other half of the crankcase, the 1.3 side. So we got the 2.4 side is going to be receiving everything, so to speak. The 1.3 side, or the right side of the crankcase, we're going to have to stuff that with lifters and anything else that might have to drop in. So there's a bunch of things that end up going in there during assembly. So we're going to have the bearings for sure, and then we're going to have the through bolts, and then we're going to have the lifter bodies are also going to go in on that side. They've got to go in before it gets settled down, and then the camshaft. So same thing here, same as the other side. and it's just make sure lube. And this is the mix. There's a couple different varieties of assembly lubes that Lycoming recommends. I'll have a lot of folks that say, well, just use automotive engine assembly lube. Well, I do add that sometimes when I'm overhauling some things, and you might see me use a dab here and there and that's my just extra effort. But most importantly, what I do is I use I will use that after I meet all my requirements as far as the manufacturer. So I'm going to make sure that I have at least what Lycoming wants, and then if I put more on, more is better. So I'm not really concerned about that. This here, I had the bearing got a little bit out of place when I was laying it in, so I got to make sure that it's set correctly. The tangs, sometimes those tangs are they get just a little bit off, and it keeps the bearing from seating. So you got to make sure that that's in the correct place. The other thing too is we're not using anything harder than the engine as far as adjusting things. I'm using a plastic mallet. That's the hardest thing I'm going to use. I'm not going to be using a metal hammer or anything like that. There's a lot of machining that goes into these, a lot of close tolerance stuff, and there's if you're using a metal hammer to place something, you are doing something very wrong. Very wrong. So same thing, getting all the bores. Now these I'm put a little lube in the counter bores where the counter bores for the O-rings on the through bolts are. Make sure those are wetted. The through bolts are wetted. Biggest thing is any time any of the O-rings when they seat, we want them to seat kind of wet so that they'll find their home. We don't want them to kind of get stuck in position. So everything's going to be slimed up pretty good. And again, here I am just making sure those tappet bores for the other half are ready to go. Good news is once we empty some of these boxes, we can pitch them. So, and you're all slimy. That's just the way the game is. You're gonna end up being slimy. Have some towels handy, whatnot. So you can see they get them in there, and then they'll just kind of slowly settle on their own if you don't push them all the way in. But most importantly is we want to make sure that they are sliding up and down nice and easy. If they're sliding up and down nice and easy, there's going to be much less metallurgical trauma on that first start. So we want everything to slide up and down, in and out, everything doing its thing. The other thing you're going to see me do quite often through the build here is I'm going to be checking to make sure the camshaft rotates and making sure the crankshaft rotates. There have been instances, not myself, but others have had the wrong bearing setups. They weren't diligent on that. They'd get the engine completely assembled, and the engine wouldn't turn, and that's a shame on them for that. There, I'm finding the wonderful box. Boom, it's out of here. So now we've got the tappet bodies in on that side, and we're putting our tappet treatment on there. And that's that dark moly type stuff. And that will only really be there for startup. Once startup occurs, a lot of that will be washed off, worn off and all that. But what it will allow is that the engine will not scrape, drag, gouge or whatever. And it's just a sacrificial lubricant until that 60 pounds of oil pressure, 80 pounds of oil pressure starts shooting at those different faces. And again, that's something we're going to check on assembly. We've checked all our gallery channels. We've checked all our lubrication channels. We've made sure that they're all clear. On some of the assembly or some of the rework at the machine shop, they might use some bead blasting. They do a lot of allodyning, machining. So it's still on you to make sure that everything is clear and ready to go. So these crankcases have been they've been assembled, or pardon me, they've been machined, they've been cleaned, allodined or chem film, whatever you want to call it, by the machine shop. We got it, we cleaned it, washed them out with water, And then we cleaned it with solvent and blew them all dry, bagged them, and then we are double checking it. During our work, we're making sure all of the passages are clear and all that, so that there's no issues on startup. We've got the crankshaft now, and the only thing I'm worried about right now are the 3 bores, the rear, middle, and forward bore. The connecting rods were all assembled last time. They were all checked, torque and all that. In fact, I will check torque again when I get the engine assembled and up on the stand. We'll get that again, and we'll have that where I'll just double check the torque one more time. So that's kind of belt and suspenders there. Oiling up the front main bearing. As I said, the front main bearing here, I'm using a little bit of extra lube, and I'm using that kind of as a glue because of this is kind of a unique bearing installation in that this will get installed, and then it's got to float, or it's got to be rotated before that crankshaft can be down. So we want to make sure that when we lift the crankshaft to the crankcase, that thing doesn't fall on the floor. So we're using our assembly lube per Lycoming, and then I'm adding a little extra mother's helper there to basically use it kind of like a grease glue to keep it in position. Nothing that'll impede the oil. Again, it's an assembly buildup product. After first startup, all of that will be broken down and go into the sump and be safe and all that good stuff. So that's what we're doing there. So that's just for that one little deal there on the front main. Now I've got to think, it's like, okay, have I got everything right? Have I got the which crank rods am I picking up? Okay, I've got 1 and 3, and that's the 2 and 4 case, so I want 2 and 4 down. So here I'm fighting with this silly stand again. I got a better idea though. I think it's like I said, it's a good stand. It's just it fights me a little bit, but we're gonna get that straightened up so it's even better. So we might actually do a little video on that, and whatnot. Getting the crankcase more centered on our table. We don't want anything to fall off for sure. And again, we're trying to keep everything as neat and tidy as we can, less claptrap, whatnot. So we're getting that done. Okay, here it is, moment of truth. We're going to lift this deal up, and this is for a 4-cylinder crankcase, or pardon me, crankshaft. For a 4-cylinder crankshaft, it's kind of a heavy deal. If you end up with a 6-cylinder, you definitely want to have 2 people for sure. So now the 2 and 4 rods are going to drop vertically. We've got our rear main and our center main are all lined up. The one thing we don't have lined up is that front main. So we've got to get the dowel pins right where it needs to be, and we've got to get that crankshaft exactly parallel. So we're going to get it as close as we can, hopefully get it lined up, and then we're going to lift. We actually have to lift it up and get it, boom. So that's kind of there, but it's not there yet. So we're still got to get those dowel pins lined up. We've got our reference marks per the manual. We just have to keep getting them in there. And this is kind of like fighting a greased pig. So it's heavy. You're slimy. It's slimy. Everything's slimy. But we're kind of just piddling around with it, making sure it gets in the right position. So it's going to take a little bit to get this right. When it does go in, it will drop in. So it's just kind of frustrating a little bit. You've got to move it fore and aft, get it in the proper fore and aft position, and also rotationally. So we're just trying to get that all lined up. Kind of a hokey way of doing it, but that's the way Lycoming wants to do it. They've been doing that design for about 60, 70 years, and it works for them. And there it is. It looks like we've got it in, and it's where it needs to be. Most importantly, things rotate. Cool. So the rear main, center main, and front main are all now in good shape. So that's cool. So everything's good. The 2 rods that'll be sticking up are the 1-3 rods, and that'll come in when we pick up our other side of our crankcase. So here we have the crankcase. We've got our mains in that we did before. We've got our tappets in that we did before. We have our camshaft that's all had the facing put on it, but for the treatment for the tappet bodies and the cam lobes. So we've got that all set. We just lubricated the bores on the other crank. Everything looks good on the other crankcase half. Everything is looking really good. Everything's rotating. Now we've got to put the through bolts in, and we're using all new through bolts. Through bolts are really not expensive at all. I would recommend, I believe the manual service bulletin recommends having them all new. Some people reuse them. The Lycoming ones, the Lycoming through bolts are actually quite reasonably priced. The Continental ones are crazy priced, but the Lycoming through bolts are definitely a good deal. They are press fit, so they're not going to just drop in. They're not going to clank through. So we're going to have to, what we're doing is we're kind of setting them a bit. And what that will allow us to do is they're an interference fit where we're setting it up so that we can put our O-rings on, get them set. And then there's enough of the through bolt poking out of the other side of the crankcase when we do start bringing torque down, is that we will be able to catch it with our nuts and washers and whatnot. So that's kind of what it's going to be looking like as far as that goes. We're going to be putting on, now we're putting on all of the O-rings for the through bolts. And again, everything, we want everything wet. Now on those inner saddle areas, that's all okay to be lubricated. There's nothing wrong with oil being in that area. The area on a Lycoming engine that we're going to be very critical about keeping clean, because we're going to be putting sealant on it, is the outside perimeter, that outside edge along the top and bottom. So that's the deal there. Again, we're getting those O-rings in place for the mains, getting everything wet. The 6, this is a 4-cylinder, so the 6 O-rings for the through bolts, the main through bolts, are all the same diameter, and they're just a red silicone you can see going on there. Most importantly is as you're going over the threads, be careful, don't get them cut, nothing like that. And then the other 2, there's 2 more smaller ones, that smaller O-rings, and those are up front, the front 2 through bolts. And again, I'm using we've lubricated, but I'm also using my assembly lube, and that is just to kind of use them as a grease to kind of stick them or glue them in position. Because what's going to happen on this crankcase half is this crankcase half is going to be turned upside down and lowered onto the existing crankcase half. So we don't want these O-rings to fall out and get out of position. So you'll see me later as I'm bringing the crankcase half together. You're going to see me making sure that those don't fall out. You're probably wondering what I'm doing, looking at the front of the engine as we're bringing it down, and that's basically what I'm doing. So now I'm getting the parting line where the sealant's going to go, getting that all cleaned off, making sure that's good. I was real good about not getting any oil on the parting line, top and bottom. Tried to be a good boy, but again, sometimes the stuff does dribble down. You also have the hassle of the connecting rods are going to have to lean on something, so that's a little frustrating sometimes, but that's not a big deal. So and keep the shop clean, get as much stuff off of there as you can. So I'm cleaning the parting line with mineral spirits, and then what I'm going to do is come back with something even more cleaner than that. So most importantly, do that. There's a service instruction that tells you all about how to do this, so check the latest service instruction on that. We'll put it down below. But most importantly, cleanliness it's all about cleanliness at this point. You'd be surprised how much damage from an engine is caused by initial startup and assembly, what I call assembly dirt. So it's pretty hard to believe that in the first minute of operating, that damage will stick with that engine. It's the majority of its life. Now what I'm using here is a piece of copper wire. It's actually just a piece of electrical wire that I took the stripping off of, the casing or whatever, the insulation. And what I'm doing now is I'm holding the camshaft in place so that when I flip it upside down, the camshaft won't fall out. Now, every time I do this, I just never get it quite tight enough. That's just my luck. But the goal there is to keep the camshaft in place so it doesn't fall out. It doesn't fall out, and we're using the camshaft to hold those tappet bodies from falling down. So we've got that camshaft wired in place. We just took the wires and wrapped them around one of the cylinder base studs. That keeps it in place. What I'm doing now is, again, we've cleaned the parting surfaces off with mineral spirits. Now I'm giving it a light wipe with some MEK, acetone, anything of that nature. And we're making sure that it's absolutely surgically dry and clean, because we're going to be using our case sealant on that area. Now, there's a bunch of different ways of doing the case sealant. Back in the old days, I used silk thread. Old days, when I went to school, that's all we had. We had silk thread, and we had the stuff called tight seal, which was like a green, almost like a green paste wax type stuff. And now with the modern sealants and all that, we've gotten away from that. So we're going to be using a modern sealant, Loctite 515. Again, directions for all that stuff is in your supplementary service instructions and overhaul manual. So your overhaul manual is going to be your go-to first, and then you're going to have supplementary shop instruction, or pardon me, service instructions that are going to give you a lot of different processes and procedures. And that stuff you're going to have to research when you are going through all your paperwork. See which ones apply to you. But there are unique ones for sealants, unique ones for torques, unique ones for different processes, oil pumps, camshaft lifters, all different stuff. So you need to make sure that you have all of those in your hand ready to go, and you've read them all. So that's what's going on now. So the next step is going to be, this is the hardest one for me anyway, is what I'll do is I'll go back into the manual, and I will actually check off and sign the paragraphs, the various paragraphs of the manual for the various and sundry steps. So what I'll do is I'll build a overhaul manual, because they're just PDFs anyway, but I'll build a copy for this particular engine, and then I'll check off to make sure that I did those various and sundry steps. So it's real important. The other thing is, if you checked off all the steps from the manual, then you've got it. You've nailed all the stuff you need to do to get this thing assembled. Now, if you're a repair station, you've got this as far as your shop planning and all that stuff. However, for an individual mechanic or a small shop, always be diligent and go through and double check. Assume nothing, because once you close this section of the engine, then then we move on to the next. We want to make sure that we took care of everything. So that's very important that we did all of the steps that are required. Now, some of the steps will be where the overhaul shop for the machine work, some of those steps will be there. They won't be applicable at your level. However, the manual, you just want to go through and make sure you have everything ready to be assembled together to the point where those two crankcase halves go together. So that's the most important thing we want to do, is make sure that we've got everything. So that's what I'm going through here. I assume nothing. I do this on every engine. I just want to make sure that I've got it all figured out. And I try to remember nothing as far as the steps. Make sure that, to a point, but make sure that I've got everything ready to go, all the boxes checked, and then we're good to go. So that's where we're going there. And I got to clean myself off too, so I'm getting all slimy. I've got oil on me, various and sundry assembly stuff, so I'm keeping my hands clean, making sure that there's no trash on there, because now I'm going to be applying lubricant, which is basically we want it to be oil free. So that's the most important thing there. So everything is in place. The crankshaft assembly is in place. The lifter bodies in both cases are in place. The bearings are in place. Everything is looking really, really good. So that's that. And again, I'm cleaning my hands off with solvent, making sure that I'm all oil free and all that. So real important. Boom, boom, boom. Checking the book again. And going back in there. So just double checking that. So the biggest thing I'm looking for now is making sure I have my service instruction call out for the layout as to where exactly the adhesive goes. Now, yeah, I could do this if I was doing an engine a day. I probably wouldn't need to reference this every time, but when you go between Continentals or Lycomings, 4-cylinders, 6-cylinders, you want to make sure that you've got that information set up. So I'm looking at basically the sealant map for where we're going to be putting our sealant, making sure that it's all exactly where it's supposed to be, and there's nothing where it doesn't need to be. So that's the important thing there, is I try to keep that handy, and still kind of tough to be organized with such a small workspace, but we're getting through it right now. So the 515 Loctite actually comes out kind of like an orange like an orange marmalade or a jelly type stuff. So put it on there, we spread it out, and we're only going to be putting it, I believe on this, we're only going to be putting it on one side. Again, that's per directions. What we want is we want to see a little bit of squeeze out, but not a lot of squeeze out. So here I am zigging along, and I'll spread it out and then kind of tap it down and make sure it's all even. Most importantly, whatever it takes to do a nice even coat, nothing more than is required. Again, we're taking two highly machined surfaces, bringing them together. So when we do bolt and torque this together, there should be little, if any, interference or air gaps anywhere. So we should see some squeeze out. So squeeze out is okay. We don't want to see a bunch of squeeze out. So just put on what is necessary. So you put on a thin layer, not a dry layer, but a thin layer. So that's the biggest thing. And go around, they will tell you what bolt holes you should be going around, or which bolt holes you should be avoiding. Most importantly is we want to stay away from you can see it on the case on the foreground, we want to stay away from those camshaft bores for sure, where the camshaft rotates. So we want to basically have a nice straight line coming down that case line, and we don't want to have anything goozing out onto a bearing surface that might impede something, or God forbid an oil passage. So we're just putting on enough. This is no time to be putting any extra on. We're just putting on enough. So just checking it out. This stuff here, it's got an open time of quite a while. I think an hour or something like that. I'll have to read the directions. But typically, don't put it on until you're ready. With any sealant, don't put it on until you're ready to close the parts together. So that's what we're doing there. So now we're getting the sealant off, and it's time to double check again, making sure everything rotates. So we're gonna get things set up here. And this is kind of a deal. It's kind of a three-handed deal where you're gonna have to get the connecting rods all in one place. But what we're going to do is we're just trying to rotate the crankshaft so that the throws are vertical, and we've got to get those out of the way on the bottom parts of wood there. So they're pretty well ready to go. And then what we'll do is we'll just basically grab those as we come up with a case. So here we go. This is it. Making an engine today. So you can see the camshaft is held in. Got my wires tight, and they're never tight enough. I don't know what it is. I can just never get them tight enough. I don't want to hurt anything. I guess that's my problem. So we bring it up, and we're gonna, kind of tough. There's no handles on it, so we want to make sure that we get everything set. Again, moving the heavy stuff to the center of the table. Boop boop. No big deal. Clear more crap off the table. Anything that doesn't need to be on the table gets off the table. So here we go. Yeah, where do I grab this thing? There's really no handle. So boom. And we'll kind of set the rear through bolts, and that just kind of gets us in line. And then we've got to bring those. You see my camshaft fell down a little bit, but it's not out. So it's not a big deal, but when we get closer, we'll get it in shape. Okay, now we're kind of coming down. And we want to make sure that those rods stay home, stay in their proper place. And we want the the crankcase to come down in a parallel manner. See, I'm fighting that camshaft again. Got to keep it up. And we're not quite down to where we want to be. We should be down to the we're going to get down to about 1.5 inches or so, where the crankcase is actually yeah, probably have to get the rubber mallet out and hold the rods and hold the upper case. So there we go. Now it's slid down. Boom. Rods are where they need to be. Boom, boom. Cool beans. Now what I'm looking for is I'm looking for make sure those 2 rubber O-rings on the forward mount bolts that don't have any through studs, making sure that they're where they need to be. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm kind of setting the case onto the shoulder of the through bolt. So as I said, that's an interference fit. That's as close as you're going to be able to get with just the by hand, so to speak. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start stacking up washers and nuts. We've got some torque plates that we are going to be using on future engines. We've got those coming out of fab. I've talked to those a couple times, but we're not there yet. So now what we're doing is we're putting on our through bolts, and we're going to basically get these things all screwed together. So that's our deal there. And we're going to pull the case halves together. The whole time we're doing this, we're going to make sure that the connecting rods are clear. We're going to make sure the cam is clear. There I am. I'm just kind of bringing that one down a little bit to make sure that I can get the nuts on the bottom. So as we get it going, just a little rubber mount to get things set, get things more parallel. You can see now the split line is quite parallel. I've got the bolts on the front. Those are coming along so I can catch those. I've got the through bolts on the mids going. So this is just a bunch of ratcheting, bringing things together. You can see it's just slowly, it'll slowly come through. Now each cylinder only 2 of the cylinder hold downs actually are part of the through bolt system. So again, making sure the cam is where it needs to be, and getting the nuts and washers all set up. Now I'm not using any air tools. I don't want to use air tools on assembly. I never use air tools on assembly ever. I could use some. I could also be using a 1/2 inch drive. I'm using a 3/4 inch drive on this because it kind of gives me a feeling. To me, it gives me a feeling when I've really got a reef on it. So I only use a kind of a short wrench. It kind of forces me not to abuse the machinery, so to speak. So that's kind of where we're going there. and I'm kind of watching it going all around each corner. And then what I'll do is, as I start pulling down, I'll end up having to put more washers on, and so that I've got more grip. On this particular setup, we're using about 3 washers on each side. Ends up being about the same thickness as a cylinder hold down flange, so that seems to work out pretty well for us. And then catching that front, we don't want that front to get behind, so we start pulling it down. You can see I'm pulling it down. I don't even have a nut on that upper one. That's the interference fit we kind of have in that case. So we'll put the washers on there. Our goal at the end of the day is that every through stud has 3 washers on it, and the nuts have about an inch or 1.5 threads. Now the nuts we're using are not the cylinder hold down nuts. The nuts we're using are some grade 8 hardware store nuts. So all of these, once it's done down, and we'll torque it, but when we do our cylinder installation, all these nuts and washers go away. They're part of shop tools. They're not, they're just assembly aids. But I don't want to wear out a bunch of brand new hardware bringing the cases together. So that's kind of what's going on here. So it's just back and forth, back and forth. I want to make sure everything's good. Check, 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 check. Now we've got a whole pile of washers and nuts and all that, so we've got those all set up. If a nut starts looking kind of crummy, we pitch it, because again, these are hardware store quality nuts. They are grade 8, but they're shop tools. If they get worn out or beat up or they start looking crummy, we just throw them out, because we don't want a $1 nut to mess up a $30 through bolt or the assembly time that we're going to have to put up with it. So you can see there, my camshaft's spinning, my crankshaft spinning. We're still good coming down. So more washers and nuts on the bottom, and we're tightening it down. This is probably, as far as the engine assembly goes, this is going to be the most traumatic for you, the most give you the most trepidation. If you're doing an engine, you haven't done one before, then get a hold of someone else to walk you through it, just to double check, kind of bird dog what you're doing. But as far as emotionally putting an engine together, this is going to be the most critical part of the engine assembly. So real important to be calm, don't be in a rush, do it right, because what you're doing is going to be lasting for a long time. So this particular engine probably hadn't been apart in 20 years, so whoever assembled it last did quite a good job. It all worked out quite well, so it was, they took their time, so you take your time. You know, in the grand scheme of things, assembling the engine is a fraction of the actual time of the lifetime of the engine. So it's worthwhile doing it right, doing it real fastidiously, make a process. It's a process, it's a procedure, whatever you want to call it. But that's kind of what it is. Again, checking the cam. Now I'm actually where the cam is not falling down on me anymore. It's actually in its bore. You can see as far as the seam is starting to close up. The other thing is, you're not seeing a bunch of squeeze out. You're not seeing it's not like you're gluing a couple 2x4s together. So we're just seeing, we will get a little bit of squeeze out, not a lot, but just enough. So we're bringing this thing together. We're within 50 thousandths of actually completing the tightening it up. So that's what's going on. We still have our electrical wire in there. We're going to take that out. Cam spins, crank spins. Yes, good deal. Now we're actually getting down to the point. You see that split line starting to go away now, as far as a gap. Bringing our forwards together. So we're getting to the end of that. Now what I will do is I will torque this up, but what happens is when we put cylinders on, we're going to remove the torque on all the cylinder pads. So why bother torquing it up? Well, the reason we want to torque it up is that we want to see, there's a crappy nut, so I ended up pitching that, putting a better nut on. We're going to loosen everything up to put the cylinders on. I get that. But what we are also going to do is we're not going to rotate the engine unless we have to. But with the bearings all torqued, all the mains torqued, those bearings can't spin. If we loosen everything up, we're not going to torque anything, and that's going to be a problem. So we're going to torque we're going to get this thing all torqued up, and then we will, one at a time, loosen the through bolts to put the cylinders on when we go to cylinder installation. So this is the biggest thing right now, is getting all these main through bolts in. And then once we do that, then we'll start putting all the perimeter bolts in. Now these are the front nose bearing bolts. And again, those are just AN bolts, but that's per the call out. We lubed them up, and they went through those O-rings that are there. So it's kind of cool. We took a little picture of some of the washers that we're using. And then, yeah, futzing around underneath the engine, getting those rear through bolts all tight. And it's hot. It's still freaking hot. It's crazy hot. It's hot in Texas. That's just what it is. So we're getting there. Yep, we're still doing the bottom. The rear through bolts you only have access to one side. They're dead-headed into the 1.3 case. And the other 4, you can see both sides. Those are actually, they hold down cylinders. They actually are party to holding down cylinders. So that's what's going on there. Again, kind of looking at my wrench through the holes. This thing is turning out really nice. This is really turning out to be a nice engine. This is going to be a sweetheart for the owner. The owner spec'd out that color. I wasn't big on the color when I first got it. However, it looks like $1 million. It's really pretty impressive. So it's going to turn out pretty well. The other thing we're doing is, if you notice, the engine stand is just simple wood construction. What we tried to do in this video is try to keep it as simple for you folks as possible. You don't have to have a lot of tooling, but you should have the correct tooling. So what we built up a support structure of wood. We actually put some counter bores so some of the cylinder base studs can nest in it without interference. Check twist. Everything's spinning. Good deal. But this is all stuff you can make. You can almost make it consumable if you're only doing one engine. You don't want to have just that engine crankcase sitting on the workbench flopping around. That's not a good thing. So you can whip out some very simple tools. You can whip out some engine stands real simply, very quickly. So I've got one for transport on this engine, and it all works out pretty well. So again, we just kind of whipped it out. So now we're pretty well down. So what I'm doing now is I'm making sure that we've got all of our through studs are centered. We've got about 1.5 threads showing on both sides. We're getting ready to, I'm getting it tight now. I'm not putting the final torque on it just yet, but I'm getting it all tight. That'll come a little bit later. That's kind of inconsequential. You folks have been seeing us torque, so you're not a torque stuff. So I'm not going to really focus on that on this one. Getting the forward through bolts, those AN bolts in the very front, getting those set, and we're bringing everything up to snug, getting where you can see it. I did have I think my Hero 7 has been conking out. I don't know if it's because it's hot or what, but we're not having a good relationship with that one. That's our camera where I'm doing some close-up stuff, so we lost that. I don't know, again, I don't know if it was about 100 plus degrees in the shop, so, or it's just the camera's not good. I'm not sure what's going on. But we're getting everything kind of snugged and tightened and all that. And everything's in pretty good shape, so edge bolts will come in later. Again, that's just nuts and bolts, not a big thing. So that's kind of where we are. And picking up miscellaneous hardware, getting those attached to those forward bolts. Okay, I guess now we're actually putting the forward bolts hardware on. And this is the forever hardware too. For those bolts, that's the forever hardware, because those once they're tightened, they're done. The other through bolts, save for the last ones, are the most aft ones will all be removed. The nuts and whatnot will be removed when we do the cylinder installation, and that will be following episode. Now we're at a point where we're putting the engine together. We've got the aft section, sump section, and then we've got the cylinders that go on. So that stuff's coming. Now here we are, taking out our copper wire from that was holding the camshaft on. So take that out and make sure everything is up and away from the engine in the trash can. Boom. Everything spins. Life is good. Snug. Life is good. Snugging those up in the front. Getting those all where they need to be. Okay, boys and girls, that's about it as far as putting the cases together. The two crankcase halves together, crankshaft, cam, and all that. As you saw, we did we buttered up the cam and the cam followers, a lot of oil putting it together. We don't use automotive type stuff, but we're using exactly what the manual tells us to use. This is an FA engine, so we're going that way. The only thing left to do now is we're going to put some final torque, bring this up to final torque, get all our mains tightened down. We always make sure that the cam and the crankshaft can spin. Very important. And then next time you see this engine, we're going to put all the little nuts and bolts around the perimeter on. We'll do that. There's a couple little special ones on the bottom. We'll show you those. And there's one behind the cam. I call it the secret nut. But we'll next time you see this engine, it'll finally be up on the engine stand. For those of you folks who wonder why it's not on an engine stand, now it's manageable to put up on an engine stand. It makes sense to put up an engine stand, and I'll probably I tried fighting the seal earlier. I'll probably get the nose seal on and put it on before we put it up in the engine stand. That way it won't piddle oil all over the place, because we've got a lot of preservative oil in here. Anyway, that's it for this one. Hanger rats out. You be safe, and we'll catch you later. Oh, I forgot. Hey, I'm back. Please like, subscribe, share, notify, all that cool stuff. And if you have any comments, please put some comments down below. If you like kind of the newish format, let me know. I'm trying to get the best sound possible for you guys. I know I've been terrible. It has been elusive for me, but in all honesty, let me know if you like this format better. This is, I think, the way to go. Like I said, I've seen a couple other YouTubers that do kind of a similar format with the voiceover. So this will be my first cut at a voiceover. So be kind, but be truthful. So let me know. But most importantly, mash that subscribe button, the notify, share, and all that good stuff. And definitely give me a comment. We've got some stuff coming up this fall for sure. We're going to do some stuff that is kind of airplaney, but not necessarily airplaney, but definitely aviation based. So we got some special stuff coming up, and we got some barn find stuff coming up too. So definitely, thanks for all you guys are doing. We're getting ready to hit 2,000, and a year ago, if you told me we were going to have 2,000, I would have laughed. So I'm just kind of pinching myself right now. It's all you guys, spreading the word and all that. If there's anything you'd like to see, Or if you're a sponsor out there and you want to push your product, hey, I'm not above taking stuff, you know, that works. But let us know. We'll be more than happy to do that kind of stuff. We're still going to be doing site visits. So, but again, thank you all for helping us out get to 2000. And we'll catch you next time.